Dude, all right, so how many weeks in a row did we make videos criticizing this composition and talk about it on the podcast? Has it been 3, 4?
Yeah, the comp has been out for 3 or 4 weeks, so I think that many.
I would say that now we are finally starting to reach the snowball of where there are significant nerfs. So Blizzard has actually released some class tuning hotfixes. I would say this is primarily aimed at 5-man content, but I think that some stuff is happening towards Raid. But more often than not, the things we're going to see today is going to be related towards Mythic Plus, and particularly aimed at God Comp. Whatever that composition is Guardian Druid, H-Pal, Augmentation Evoker, Fire Mage, Shadow Priest. That's what it is whenever we're referring to God Comp. But some classes got buffed in the process.
Yeah, we've got some buffs to all 3 warrior specs. We've got buffs to Ret, Holy, Outlaw, Disc. So that's good.
Yeah, so I mean, you have things like Outlaw, all damage increased by 5%, auto attack damage increased by 5%, Warrior, Ravager, and Thunderous Roar damage, and then, Unholy DK, Epidemic, and Bursting Swords. I think if this was like an MDI season, maybe we would see more Unholy Death Knight, but in general, I mean, Epidemic and Bursting Swords is only taken in Mythic Plus. It's never taken in outside of. It's not taken in Raid. So let's cover the God Comp nerfs and just kind of give our thoughts about it. So first up on the list, we have Guardian Druid. Thrash and Raise damage reduced by 8%. This doesn't really move the needle on anything. I think that you and I probably are going to tend to agree with that.
Yeah, it's a very slight nerf to the defensive Guardian as well, not just through Leech, but also through Ursoc's Fury shields, but it is less of a nerf to the defense than the previous nerf to Ursoc's Fury, which was also not a real nerf. So yeah, Guardian is still the best tank by far, I suspect.
I will say that Guardian Druid's in the meta for a couple of reasons. First off, it's the tankiest tank right now, which, I mean, in general, more often than not in 5-man content, you're going to pick the tank that has the best survivability. That's just how it is. Their damage is okay. They're probably the second highest damaging tank. You can make an argument that they're better than Venge, but I think in general they're a little bit worse than Vengeance damage-wise. But then on top of that, they bring Mark of the Wild, which gives you probably like half a key level to a full key level worth of survivability and 3% damage from the versatility of Mark of the Wild. So the Guardian Druid kit really works well for 5-man content in that regard. And so I think it's going to be kind of challenging to get away with it whenever you're only giving them like slap on the wrist nerfs. Now, I will say, anecdotally, I think the tank role is the most flexible, right? I think that you can play other tanks if you're really trying to.
It's maybe the spot where you could get away the most with, because all tanks with augmentation are pretty powerful, yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's a pretty wide gap though between Bear and the field.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, but this is not making the field any closer. Next up, Augmentation Evoker. Now the buffs are progressing a little bit further. Blizzard adds a note. Augmentation is adding significant amount of damage to their party while providing strong utility and survivability. For this week, we'd like to reduce some of the damage contributions from their buffs to help bring them more in line with other classes. Breath of Eons accumulates 10% of damage done by allies with your Ebb and Might, was previously 15, and Fate's Mirror's chance to proc has been reduced to 10%, was 15. Pretty small nerf, all things considered. Was doing some napkin math on this, and this, probably seems like in an overall situation for Mythic Plus, a few thousand DPS, maybe as high as like 7 or 8, but not really hitting a large chunk of Augmentation's ability. Breath of Eons isn't like their highest damage contribution source and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sizable nerf. It's much bigger than the Guardian one, yeah.
It's a 33% nerf to Breath of Eons, which is their third.
Right, their CD.
Yeah, it's their CD. It's like the Touch of Magi effect. It's the thing that you see will like insta-pop mobs and like insta-kill them, right? Whenever you play it with a really strong composition that utilizes it well, you're able to get great use out of Breath of Eons. Again, though, I think that a lot of the value of Augmentation Evoker is not necessarily in the damage, although the damage of it is quite good. The defensive value is strong.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive value is nice. If Augmentation was doing 80% of the damage of a good DPS, we would find a way to live without the DPS, without the defensive value, though, is the thing, right? So, like, the damage is certainly a relevant way to tune this spec. It's might be enough. I'm not sure. I think this is probably still not quite enough, but I think it'll go a long way towards playing stuff other than augmentation being, like, at least in Group Finder, being a little bit less required.
I will say the defensive value generally is pretty good, especially in seasons. So Blizzard's designed 2 seasons in a row where survivability and personal survivability is almost more important than having high DPS. Obviously, DPS is still king, but making sure that you're able to live either one shots or like sustained heavy AoE damage is important, and Augmentation Evoker is great at that. I don't know. I think that looking at these, the spec is still likely to be in the meta, right? Or you can definitely still play it, right? Even if it falls out of the meta, it will certainly be in a spot where you can still play it.
I think it's likely to either be in the best comp or, in the second or
right
third
outside
best
of it.
comp. Yeah. I think probably still the best comp. Yeah.
I tend to agree with that. I think that Guardian Druid and Augmentation are still in the best composition. We didn't talk about marksmanship buffs. It's great for them. Happy for you.
Yeah, that's good.
Mages, both Fire and Frost got, I don't want to say like insanely large nerfs, but Fire, I saw the number that was thrown around was about 8% to their AoE and like a negligible single target nerf with this. A large majority of that coming from like Flame Strike and Flame Patch damage being decreased by 10%. Living Bomb does contribute a little bit, and Phoenix Flames is a bit. Fire was definitely in a spot where it was oppressively strong, but I will say that I felt like Fire was the most flexible DPS in God Comp, right? Out of Shadow Priest, Augmentation, Evoker.
Yeah, because Shadow and Augmentation are a lot harder to, like, the synergy value. It's a lot harder to break that apart. Whereas the Fire spot you could fill with kind of like any kind of carry damage.
If there was any DPS that was better than Fire, you would bring them instead.
Right,
likely.
exactly. That was what that spot was for. So
yeah,
it does. This is possibly. It's not like these nerfs are the hugest, but this was the spot that was most easily breakable open. So maybe we'll start to see some other exciting options in this spot, like Destruction, Affliction, Enhancement. I think
sub is very, very good right now too. But sub, you have an issue of power infusion in your composition.
That's the problem, is who you PIing, but maybe you're. Yeah, I guess that is the big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, sub is very good too. I don't know. Then a bit of a surprising one, but Frost Mage also got hit. There were mages that were, after the most recent round of Fire nerfs, that were coping that Frost was going to be the best spec. And whenever I watched them play it, it looked good, but obviously it wasn't Fire Mage good. And I think that, it was obviously super tough to be Fire Mage good. I'm a bit surprised that they preemptively nerfed Frost. How do you feel about this?
That spec was really good. I don't know. I've played with Frost in some dungeons at the start of the first few weeks when we were kind of like feeling it out, and it was not that far behind. I think there's a decent chance that, and again, like the targeting of the AoE here, I think is really good. So
yeah, I think that this is totally fair. I don't think that these are specs that are, you look at them in Warcraft logs or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, these things aren't that insane in raid content. But then you see them in a 5-man, and you're like, oh my god, this thing is the most broken thing ever. Okay, probably one of the largest set of nerfs is to Holy Paladin. And the Holy Paladin nerfs, first off, just flat, all healing reduced by 5%. This comes after, did they get an all healing reduced by 8% nerf as well a few weeks back?
Yeah, they've been getting, I think they got a nerf like that. They also got a bunch of nerfs like abilities as well back then. It was a fairly large set of patch notes, but here comes another one, a larger set.
Yep, so all healing reduced by 5%. This is one of the bigger ones. And then the other 2 large ones, or 3 large ones, are Blessing of Summer now causes like a Blessing of Summer nerf, which is a large portion of their damage, and it's completely passive on the Holy Paladin's end. Righteous Judgment now has a 30% chance to activate Consecration, which was previously 50%, and now Consecration's damage is reduced by 25%. So they're really hitting down the HPAL damage. Holy Paladin in general, I would say that their biggest advantage this season, first off, is short kick, and second off is their damage that they were providing to the group was quite good. Obviously, they have other things such as Devo Aura and whatever else, but other healers do bring valuable things to Mythic Plus. I would say that the damage provided by the Holy Paladin was the highest of all the healers by a decent amount. And then, it's just like the damage that was provided by the Holy Paladin was better than other healers by a decent amount. And their healing throughput was kind of wild.
Yeah, Now, again, that looks like a lot of nerfs, but they may still be the best option or a great option for this. It's possible something like Resto Shaman, Disc Priest even could start filling groups, but I think Holy Paladin's probably still fine. I think the main thing, though, is that like the healing difficulty is going up, right? Like it's going to be harder to heal in future weeks than it was in previous weeks. It's not going to be as cozy because if you were doing keys in the last few weeks, it often felt like if your healer was awake, there was not like a healing challenge that they could not easily solve with their Holy Paladin buttons. And that may stop being quite as true, which healers are divided on whether that's a good or bad thing.
Yeah, I mean it's tough to say, but I think that whenever one healer is able to do it and the other healers would struggle if put in a similar position, I think that there's a problem with that, and so I think the nerfs in that aspect are a bit warranted.
Yeah,
Rep buffs, very cool for all Rep Paladin players. I think the spec was actually pretty good, but it's tough because like I don't think this is enough to like throw them into the meta or anything. I don't think that this changes effectively how I feel about the spec.
Nice to see some AoE buffs to this spec. Maybe makes it, and also it's a very popular spec. It's a popular and fun spec, so I think it's good to help bring its power level up a little bit. Yeah,
it was one of the most popular specs in 10.1. So
yeah,
for 5 minutes. Priest. Basically they nerfed Vamp Embrace. They also nerfed Sand Lane, which was CDR on Vamp Embrace. I think that's like the big stuff to know. Disc got a slight buff, but I think that this isn't like an insane thing for Mythic Plus. Holy got a little bit of a buff as well. Mostly aimed at 5 minutes. Holy was already seen as pretty good in Raid, and Disc was seen as not that great in Raid. The big Priest nerfs, though, are Shadow. And so we got a massive Psychic Link nerf to Shadow a couple weeks back, which ended up reducing their AoE damage by a considerable amount. And then they got an AoE nerf again last reset with compensatory single target buffs, which made them one of the better single target specs of the game.
Yeah,
which seems fair, honestly. Like okay.
They were buffed in M+ when they were trying to nerf them in M+, so that wasn't good. Well, that's not what you should try and do.
They nerf their overall.
Yeah, but the prior damage is like the more important thing in the comp anyways.
I would agree with that, yeah.
So now this is also not a good set of nerfs, though, because this is nerfing their raid damage, which the spec doesn't need. Now, it's tough, because I think they don't want to go after Psychic Link any further, because that number it's been reduced from like 30 down to 15%. If you take Psychic Link down to like 10% or something, people are just going to be like, okay, what is the point of this talent? Which, fair question. But on the other hand here, if you hit their dots like this, like now their single target in raid is getting hurt in a way that is unfortunate. I think it's rough.
I was looking at like Apparition and VT damage. Apparition and VT like combined would make up about 30% of a Shadow Priest damage contribution over the course of a whole entire Mythic Plus run. And so both Vamp Touch, Shadow Word Pain, and Apparitions all getting hit by 20, 15, and 15%. That's tough. Like, that's real tough. These are some steep Shadow nerfs that are coming off the back of other Shadow Priest nerfs. I feel like this is not the way to nerf the spec. I think the issue with the spec is that the class itself, Priest, not just Shadow, the class itself, Priest, is required for dungeons this season. Think about Brackenhide Hollow Cages. Think about Mind Soothes and Halls of Infusion. Think about Mass Dispel and Halls of Infusion. Think about
Mass Dispel on Brackenhide First Boss, Mass Dispel on Dragons and Halls of Infusion, Mass Dispel on Watcher Iridius and Halls of Infusion, Mass Dispel on Chronolord Deus at the end of Uldaman, Mass Dispel on the Timekeepers at the end of Uldaman. Like, there are ways to deal with these mechanics that aren't with Mass Dispel, and if you're doing a weekly 20, a lot of them work. If you're trying to push Keystones and you're trying to do one of these dungeons without it, like, that's not, it's not feasible. Like, it's not good. It's not like, it is not close, the utility of the Priest versus the other classes against these dungeon mechanics, not to mention the amount of mobs that are Mind Soothable but have True Sight, so the only way that you can skip them is with a Shadow Priest with Mind Soothe.
All right.
Or a Priest with Mind Soothe, rather.
Now there's a question. Are keys capped? After these changes, what do you think? What's your initial reaction to that?
This is the similar, it's the same as last time, except maybe the nerfs are a little bit bigger. The keys aren't capped, but that's not the problem. The keys have gotten harder, And anytime that the keys get substantially harder, there is a problem, which is the keys we did last week at the same level will now feel easier than the keys we do this week at the same level, right? Like, and obviously affixes changing throws some variance into this, but in general, the keys done 3 weeks ago are going to have been a lot easier than the keys done next week, which is not good. Now, or was it capped? Possibly not. Possibly we were, it was the first week of the new meta or something. Maybe nobody got up as high as they can go. Maybe teams playing out of their minds can push a little bit higher. But that's not the problem. The problem is that like any group anywhere on the ladder will need to play better to achieve the same outcome in future weeks. So there should be compensation nerfs to Mythic Plus difficulty to make this not an issue, and that should be the core part of Blizzard's toolkit that they deploy. That anytime they do substantial class nerfs mid-patch, they should do that, I think, if it's to a Mythic Plus comp, and it should also make them feel comfortable to therefore do the nerfs of the size they need to, rather than come in and be like, hey, sorry, Guardian, we're going to take 20% off of your Ursox Fury Shield. Hope everything's okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is so fake,
right,
and
like
the Ursox Fury Shield is so stupid.
Yeah, so they should do bigger nerfs and feel confident in doing them if they need to by nerfing the dungeon level if they have to. And of course, they should also be buffing underperforming specs. I think there's not quite enough of that in these patch notes. I think underperforming healers, it's a shame to not see more of them being represented in here. But in general, they did need to nerf the 5 specs in this comp, I believe. And, Shadow probably didn't need to be nerfed in this way. It needed to be nerfed in terms of the priest utility, sure. But
yes,
all 5 of these specs are bringing much more value than the next best option, except for maybe Fire, which is bringing only medium more than the next best option. And so nerfs were warranted along with buffs to underperformers.
I will say that just anecdotally, we were talking last week about how keys weren't necessarily capped, but I will say, as somebody who only play, like I do Mythic Plus like a considerable amount, but I'm only playing like 10 hours a week maybe at the most, right? I only key for like 10 hours a week, and I will say that doing that is much harder this season whenever things are so much more volatile like this, right? Where parts of your composition are getting completely nerfed every single week, and then it's like, oh, something that was reasonably doable on a 27 a couple weeks back, now you're like really struggling to time on a 27 and not able to do on a 28. It feels very awkward. And obviously, if you played more or you spent more time in doing Mythic Plus, it would be fine. But I think that like whenever you're spending the same amount of effort, you're trying to progress something, and then you're like not able to get rewarded for it because of stuff that is a little bit out of your control, that does suck.
Yeah, and that's true anywhere on the ladder. Like even if the patch came out and you were blasting, you were having trouble with 20s, the patch came out, you started blasting 20s, these nerfs come out. Again, you're probably not playing the whole comp, but if you were playing one of these specs and now all of a sudden either your difficulty of getting invited to that level of key or of timing that level of key goes back up again, like that is an unpleasant experience, is the difficulty going up in the middle of the patch. So keeping the balance good, but making sure the difficulty on average isn't going up, I think is worth doing. If it goes up by a little bit, that's fine. But I think the combination of these nerfs is enough that they should be looking at doing some compensation changes to dungeons.
Are these enough nerfs?
I think it's a good step. Again, if they're willing to keep doing frequent nerfs, I think they can be smaller. That's kind of always what we've wanted, right? Was like frequent small nerfs rather than like try and do enough to only have to nerf once, because sometimes when you do that, your spec just gets deleted from the game, right? So
what was it that
I think
you
that's
said?
Probably good.
Continue to nerf these specs by 2% every single day until the meta changes or something.
Yeah, it's something like that. Like that would maybe be the. I mean, okay, obviously that's like hyperbolic, but
yeah, not every single day they're going to get nerfed by 2%.
I do think that nerfing it in 2 weeks again, if it needs to be, or in 1 week or whatever, is probably fair.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird because we're so late into the season too, so I think that the meta is like pretty stale in that regard, right? I think it's going to be actually pretty difficult to get away from these specializations, especially if you've designed strategies and you've played around them for a couple of weeks. We see that happen fairly often. Unless something is like overwhelmingly better, then it's hard to migrate off of it in a timely manner. And obviously with this composition, whenever it came out with 10.1.5, it was so overwhelmingly better that people immediately re-rolled to it. But if it's not like a state of that, if it's not in like a state like that, then people are going to be a bit more hesitant, right, to re-roll off of something that they know is like the tried and true there's a reason that this was nicknamed God Comp, right? You're gonna reroll. You're gonna be hesitant to reroll off of it because you know how all the pieces work together, and they do work together so well.
Yeah, the synergy of the specs is definitely another hard. The synergy of the specs and the value of Massive Spell and Mind Soothe are definitely very hard parts in nerfing the spec or nerfing this comp by enough that it's not broken, but not so much that it's not playable.
Well, I think you need a priest regardless. Like I don't think it matters the specialization of priest. I think it matters that you have one of
the only way to change that is through the dungeons, and that is obviously like a lot harder to do.
Well, I mean, this was criticism of those dungeons. The whole
right that's true. We've been criticizing the massive spells in particular since the season came out.
Well, I think Mind Soothe, every mob has True Sight too. Like not every mob, but like so many mobs have True Sight to where you can't even use an invisibility potion in a lot of spots where you're just like mind soothing and running by, which that feels like a mistake, right? Like the intention of having those mobs having True Sight is to where you were forced to pull them, but for some reason you're able to just soothe and run by. And so it's like, all right, Blizzard either needs to cut back on the amount of mobs that have True Sight, because that's a lot of them, by the way. There's a lot of mobs that have True Sight, or they need to make sure that Mind Soothe cannot work on mobs that have True Sight. Like that's dumb.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both, right? Like, give us fewer True Sight mobs, let us skip more of these things with Invis Pod or Shroud or Mass Invis or whatever, and then also make the ones that you are saying can't be skipped actually not be skipped even by Mind Soothe. Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind committing Invisibility Potion, right? Like,
Invis Pod's like
fine.
It's good. Maybe you could make that a better kind of Invis than Shroud or something, and that one actually goes through True Sight or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
All right, cool.
No thoughts. Head empty.
Head empty, no thoughts. We'll see you guys later. If you have any thoughts, you can leave them down in the comment section below. Goodbye.